Most people don't realize that the brain is less interested in truth than it is in comfort. Psychology explains why you can know something is wrong and still convince yourself it makes sense. This is happening for a reason, and once you see it, you'll start noticing it everywhere. By the end, you'll understand the dark psychology trick your brain uses to justify bad decisions, why it feels so convincing, and how to catch it before it quietly shapes your life. The trick is called rationalization, but it is not just making excuses. It is a powerful psychological defense mechanism designed to protect your identity. Your brain wants one thing above almost everything else: to see you as a good, smart, consistent person. When your actions don't match that image, tension builds. Psychologists call this cognitive dissonance. Cognitive dissonance is the discomfort you feel when your behavior and beliefs clash. Imagine someone who sees themselves as loyal but starts texting someone behind their partner's back, or someone who values health but keeps overeating late at night. That uncomfortable mental tension has to go somewhere. Here's the surprising part. Most people assume they will change their behavior to reduce that discomfort, but often the brain changes the story instead. Instead of saying, "I made a bad choice," the mind says, "It's not that bad," or "Everyone does this," or "I deserve this." Have you ever noticed how quickly a mistake turns into a justification? This is not weakness, it is wiring. The brain is constantly predicting, protecting, and preserving your sense of self. The prefrontal cortex helps you reason, but emotional areas like the amygdala react first. When your identity feels threatened, the emotional brain pushes for relief. Rationalization becomes that relief. You do not feel like you are lying to yourself. You feel like you are being reasonable. At work, this might look like blaming a missed deadline on unfair expectations instead of poor planning. In relationships, it might look like minimizing hurtful words by saying, "They're too sensitive." In finances, it might call impulsive spending self-care. Each time, the story shifts just enough to protect the ego. Here's a reflective question. What is one decision you defended strongly, even when part of you knew it was wrong? That pause you just felt is cognitive dissonance surfacing. Another layer makes this even more powerful. The more public your decision, the stronger your need to justify it. Once you tell friends you're quitting your job, risking a risky investment, or staying in a difficult relationship, your brain doubles down. Admitting error now threatens your social identity, and humans are deeply wired for social belonging. Your brain would rather distort reality than risk shame. Now consider something even more uncomfortable. Sometimes the brain reframes harmful behavior as growth. Someone stays in a toxic dynamic and says, "This is teaching me resilience." Or they tolerate disrespect and say, "No one is perfect." The narrative sounds mature, but underneath, it may be fear of loss or fear of change. The mind is incredibly skilled at turning avoidance into virtue. Why does this trick work so well? Because rationalization often contains a small piece of truth. Yes, everyone makes mistakes. Yes, relationships require compromise. Yes, rest is important. The brain takes that fragment of truth and stretches it just enough to cover the behavior. It feels logical because it's partially logical. This is where confirmation bias joins the process. Once you justify a decision, your brain starts scanning for evidence that supports it. You notice articles, conversations, and examples that reinforce your choice. You ignore or dismiss anything that challenges it. Over time, your belief feels stronger, not because it's correct, but because it's reinforced. Have you ever argued for something so passionately that you forgot why you chose it in the first place? That's not stubbornness alone. That's identity protection at work. There's also a power dynamic happening. When you make a questionable choice and successfully justify it, you regain a sense of control. You rewrite the narrative. You become the author instead of the accused. That feeling of control is rewarding. Dopamine responds not only to pleasure, but to perceived progress and coherence. When your story makes sense again, your brain relaxes. The discomfort fades. You feel stable. But there is a cost. Each time you rationalize instead of reflect, you strengthen the habit. The brain learns that story editing is easier than behavior changing. And slowly, your standards shift. A small lie becomes a necessary lie. A minor compromise becomes a pattern. A temporary exception becomes a lifestyle. This is how people drift into situations they once said they would never accept. Now, pause for a moment. Where in your life have your standards quietly moved? Not because you consciously chose less, but because you explained it away. Here is the deeper insight. Rationalization protects you in the short term, but weakens you in the long term. It reduces immediate psychological pain, but it blocks growth. Real growth requires tolerating discomfort without rewriting the story. It requires saying, "I chose this, and it was not aligned with who I want to be." That sentence is powerful. Notice there is no self-attack in it, just ownership. The goal is not to eliminate rationalization completely. It's part of being human. The goal is awareness. When you feel an immediate rush to defend yourself, slow down. When you find yourself saying, "It's not that bad," ask what feels threatening underneath. Is it shame? Fear of judgment? Fear of loss? Often, the justification is hiding something more vulnerable. Another surprising truth is that highly intelligent people are often better at rationalizing. They have stronger verbal skills, better reasoning ability, and more creativity. That means they can construct convincing internal arguments. Intelligence does not protect you from self-deception. It can refine it. So what interrupts the trick? Curiosity instead of condemnation. Instead of attacking yourself for a bad decision, ask gently, what need was I trying to meet? Maybe it was validation. Maybe it was safety. Maybe it was control. When you identify the need, you no longer have to defend the behavior. You can address the need directly. That shift changes everything. The brain justifies bad decisions to protect identity, but you can expand your identity to include imperfection. You can be someone who makes mistakes and still grows. And here's the final pattern interrupt. The moment you can admit, even privately, "I was wrong," you experience a different kind of power. Not the power of control, but the power of alignment. Alignment feels quieter than justification, but it lasts longer. The dark psychology trick is not evil, it is protective. It kept you safe when criticism felt dangerous. It preserved belonging when rejection felt unbearable. But you are not helpless inside it. The next time you catch yourself rewriting a story, pause. Feel the discomfort. Let it exist without immediately fixing it. That small gap between action and explanation is where growth lives. When you understand this mechanism, you start seeing it in conversations, in headlines, in arguments, even in yourself. And instead of feeling manipulated by your own mind, you feel aware. That awareness is freedom. If this perspective made you reflect on a decision you've been defending, sit with that insight. Growth often begins with discomfort. Share your thoughts below. Have you ever caught yourself justifying something you later reconsidered? And if this helped you see your mind more clearly, consider subscribing for more explorations into human behavior and psychology. Understanding your mind is not about judging it. It's about learning how it protects you so you can choose when to protect yourself and when to evolve.